Okay, let's think about this for a second. What if the biggest mystery, the one that's fascinated people forever, what happens after, if that wasn't just guesswork? What if you could actually get a glimpse? Or even more, what if you could hear directly from people who've, well, crossed over? And maybe the wildest part, what if those voices belong to people we recognize, like famous poets, influential preachers, respected historians? Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the show that unpacks complex ideas, sometimes really surprising facts, all to help you get informed fast. Today we're going on a pretty extraordinary journey right into the heart of spirit communication and, well, the afterlife. And we're drawing directly from this unique collection of what are called spirit messages from the early 1900s. These aren't theories. They're described as detailed, personal accounts. It's a really unusual perspective.
It really is. And like you said, our sources for this deep dive, they're not your typical academic papers, not at all. And they're not theological arguments either. What we have are these personal records, incredibly detailed notes of communications. You should think of almost like firsthand witness statements, maybe, but from a place that's, well, usually just debated or imagined, rarely explored with this kind of intimacy. So our mission today is really to pull out the big insights, the comforting ideas, maybe even some things that challenge how we think about life and death, all straight from these conversations. We want to give you a shortcut, really, to understanding this unique viewpoint on the whole spiritual journey. And this is especially for those of you in the spiritual community. Maybe you're just starting to explore these ideas, feeling curious, looking for answers about, life's purpose, or maybe you've held deep beliefs about the unseen world for a long time and you're looking for some deeper insights, more nuance. I think you'll hear things that echo long-held spiritual wisdom, definitely, but also some interpretations that are genuinely surprising.
Might even shift your perspective a bit.
Okay, so if these messages are, supposedly coming from beyond, the first big question is, how? How did this communication even start? Was it like flipping a switch, instant connection, or did it take time? Because the sources seem to paint a picture of a very gradual start, almost painstaking, not like someone just picked up a phone.
That's a really key place to start. And you're right, the sources show this fascinating developmental process. It really struck me how clear it was. At the very beginning, communication was, well, basic. Really rudimentary, just simple yes or no answers. And it wasn't even speech or, automatic writing at first. It was physical things happening, specifically raps, like knocking sounds. The system was dead simple. 3 raps meant yes, 1 rap meant no. It suggests this very basic, almost like a code kind of interaction, a bit like maybe how a baby points before they can talk, just establishing some kind of reliable channel, even if it was limited.
Right. And what's so interesting is how that process seems to mirror learning, like human learning. It wasn't static. It didn't just stay as taps. The sources say that after several months of just these basic raps, they started hearing whispered voices. Fainted at first, apparently, maybe hard to make out. And then eventually those whispers got stronger, clearer, becoming fully vocal communication, clear enough that someone could actually write it down, transcribe it. It's almost exactly like watching a kid learn to speak, isn't it? Going from gestures to sounds, maybe single words, then full sentences. It shows this clear progression, this development, and how clearly they could communicate.
Exactly. A conscious development, it seems. And what's also interesting is that this evolution wasn't just on the spirit side. The frequency of the sessions, the sittings, that changed too, which is kind of an interesting detail. They started out meeting twice a week, but then they cut back to just once a week. And apparently this wasn't because things were slowing down or failing. The sources say it was because both sides, the spirits and the living people involved, especially the main receiver, Hiram Corson, they were getting better at it. Their understanding, their connection was improving. So it suggests this mutual learning curve, right? A cooperative effort to fine-tune the connection. Imagine trying to get a clear radio signal across a huge distance. Both sides have to adjust. One spirit actually said they had passed to a sphere of higher vibrations.
Higher vibrations, what does that imply here?
Well, in these texts, it seems to mean a more refined energy state, like the radio frequency becoming clearer, more stable. It allowed for more efficient communication and actually increased their work, their ability to interact. So it implies this deeper alignment, spiritual development maybe, that allowed for clearer, more impactful communication, almost like getting better bandwidth for the spirit connection. It suggests the whole process wasn't just technical, not just about the method, but something deeply spiritual and energetic was developing too, enabling more capacity, more purpose on their side.
Okay, so that's the spirit side evolving. But what about our side? This communication wasn't just happening in thin air, right? It needed people, human facilitators. Who were these people, and what exactly was their role? It sounds pretty demanding.
Absolutely critical. The sources really emphasize the role of several specific mediums. Early on, in New York City, there's mention of a Mrs. Mayer. She was known for slate writing. That was one of the early methods, spirit supposedly writing directly onto slate boards.
Right, I've heard of that.
Yeah. And then later there was Mrs. Matilda Sjoegren. Interestingly, she was actually the housekeeper for Hiram Corson, the man recording all these messages. She became the medium for their daily sittings. And her development kind of mirrored that evolution we talked about. Started with physical things, then the raps, then the whispers, and finally, full voice communication. Her daily commitment alone tells you something about the dedication involved. And then for later sittings, they mention a Mrs. Mini-Me serves soul. She was a trance medium, apparently highly recommended by a Miss Lillian Whiting, who was a known author and spiritualist at the time. Mrs. Soul was apparently key for continuing and deepening these conversations, often letting the spirit speak directly through her while she was in a trance state.
So the medium was crucial, but it wasn't just the medium, was it? The sources seem to stress how important the person receiving the messages was, in this case, Hiram Corson himself, who was writing it all down. F.W.H. Myers, he was one of the spirit communicators, but also a researcher in life. He said something really interesting about this. He said, and I'm quoting here, "It is the spirit of receptivity which you create. That is the next step. We must have the receiver, the interviewer, educated and living in the spiritual life." That sounds like more than just being passively open. It suggests the receiver's own spiritual state, their mindset, actually affects the quality of the message, like a co-creation.
That's a fantastic point. It really paints a picture of a cooperative process, doesn't it? Where the receiver's intellect, their spiritual openness, is just as important as whatever psychic ability the medium has. The source material even notes that the spirits draw largely from your brain capacity, using terms and phrases familiar to you and perfectly unfamiliar and without meaning to her, the medium.
So they tailor the message through the receiver's mind.
It seems that way. So it can be understood in familiar terms. It makes this whole cooperative nature central to what they call spiritual navigations, allowing messages to be understood from either side of the veil, like building a bridge of consciousness. It's definitely not just a one-way transmission from the spirit world. It's a co-creation of meaning that needs active, spiritually tuned-in participation from the living side, too. Shows the deep dedication these people had, really.
Okay, this is a big one for a lot of people, myself included sometimes, especially if you're new to exploring spirituality, or even if you've been interested for a while, but, you still have that healthy skepticism. The question is always, how do you know who you're talking to? It's one thing to hear a voice or get a message, but how do you actually verify it's who they say they are?
Yeah.
Beyond just believing it. And it seems like the people involved back then understood this was a hurdle.
Oh, absolutely. It was a huge concern for them, precisely because they knew they needed credible evidence if this was ever going to be taken seriously. Hiram Corson, the main receiver, he states pretty clearly about the spirits communicating, quote, "I never had occasion to question the identity of any member of it," it being the spirit band communicating with him. But he also admits, very realistically, that identity is a thing which cannot be proved to unbelievers, nor even to some believers. He knew proof was tricky. However, the text does offer some compelling evidence, at least within its own framework. And this comes particularly through F.W.H. Myers again. Remember, he was a researcher in life, very rigorous.
Right, the investigator.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He was really determined to find ways to corroborate these communications.
And Myers was apparently mightily interested in the cross-evidence. That phrase alone sounds almost scientific, doesn't it? He came up with this fascinating, almost ingenious method for trying to verify identity, trying to provide some kind of checkable data, not just relying on one person's experience. He laid out this scenario basically saying, look, if I can come to you, meaning Corson, at your Thursday circle, tell you something specific, and you write it down, and then I can go over here to Boston the same evening and say something to her, meaning the medium there, Mrs. Soul, and she writes that down, and the two messages correspond. Well, haven't we got the cross-reference pretty well established? Aw, that's clever.
Yeah.
Correlating information from different places at the same time.
It is clever. It highlights this deliberate, almost scientific approach within their spiritual framework. They were actively trying to address the skepticism they knew existed. The spirits themselves seemed concerned with providing verifiable data. That's pretty remarkable, isn't it? Shows their intention wasn't just to chat, but to be understood and believed. Myers also added something interesting about Hiram Corson himself. He said Corson's isolation, meaning he wasn't deeply involved in other spiritual circles, and his lack of expectation actually helped him get clearer messages.
How so?
Because he wasn't handicapped by what other people expected. He didn't have preconceived notions coloring what he heard. It suggests the channel was purer, less influenced by suggestion or desire, allowing the unique personalities, the specific information of each spirit, to come through more clearly. It speaks to the integrity they were aiming for, showing a real effort from the spirit side to bridge that gap of understanding and prove they were really there.
Okay, so when we think about the afterlife, a lot of common images come to mind, right? Maybe floating on clouds, eternal rest, peaceful but maybe static, like reaching a final destination, the end of the line. But these sources, they seem to paint a completely different picture, much more vibrant, much more active.
Oh, absolutely. Totally different vibe. This deep dive into their messages reveals that spirits are described as not passive or diminished. Not at all. They apparently lead an active life, they possess added powers, and they're engaged in all sorts of activities, often carrying on with the passions and purposes they had on Earth. Phillips Brooks, remember, the influential clergyman. He really challenges that common idea of death being an end to activity. He says, quite frankly, the world here is so much a world of sense that I find it hard to realize that I am dead. Which sounds odd, he admits. He then clarifies, perhaps I should modify it and say, I find it strange to find myself considered dead, except in influence.
Wow. So he still feels very much present, active, influential?
Exactly. His existence feels continuous, purposeful, just transformed.
That's huge. It reframes death not just as a transition, but as a transition into a new phase of existence, a dynamic, purposeful phase. And it's not just random activity, is it? The spirit world is explicitly called a place of continued progress and advancement. They talk about spiritual vitality, about growth. It suggests a state that's constantly evolving, a journey that absolutely doesn't stop when the body does. Brooks even looks ahead, foreseeing an expression from the sphere of even larger usefulness than that which I left behind. That's such a powerful message, isn't it? Especially if you're looking for meaning, for purpose that lasts beyond physical life. It says our growth, our contribution, it doesn't just end.
Precisely. It completely knocks down the idea that being dead means you stop contributing or developing. Take Valentine Mott, the physician spirit. He talks about this continuity of purpose. He says his care has not been remitted regarding his medical interests. He's still working as a healer, essentially. But now, he says, instead of just easing pain like he did on Earth, spirits like him are trying to, and this is his phrase, oust death from his stronghold in the human family.
Oust death. That's intense.
Isn't it? And not just alleviate pain, but fit men to express all that is in them. It clearly points to ongoing, purposeful work and even a development of their abilities after physical death. They're not just resting on their laurels. They're actively involved in helping humanity, unlocking potential from their new perspective. #tag sensory experiences and physicality in the spirit world.
Okay, this is one of the bits I find most intriguing. When people explore spiritual ideas, they often wonder, do the things we love here, nature, music, even simple things like smells, do they continue? These sources give some incredibly vivid details about that, and they really challenge that idea of spirits just being, wispy ghosts.
They really do. Despite being out of the body, the spirits insist they experience a world, so much a world of sense. It's not some abstract void. They talk about attending grand concerts, hearing violins played so divinely, enjoying nature scenes with all their beauty and harmony. These aren't just memories. They describe them as direct, perceived experiences happening now for them. Rollin Corson, one of the spirits, even mentions perceiving the odor of your smoke from the physical world. That's a striking detail about sensory continuity, isn't it?
Wow, yeah, smoke.
Apparently. And Elizabeth Barrett Browning, the poet, talks about being thrilled with music as I always was. She mentions hearing the soul of the famous violinist Ole Bull singing through the strings. It suggests art and music are experienced even more deeply, more resonantly there.
Okay, and what about how they appear? Are they those see-through figures from movies, or do they have a more solid, recognizable form?
Well, the descriptions are surprisingly solid. They're described with physical-sounding attributes, like robust and sturdy, having a sensitive mouth, a resonant body, brown hair. One is described as a delicate little girl, who is clearly grown and matured in spirit. They even talk about manifesting in fine garments and jewels, which is fascinating. It suggests self-expression continues.
Jewels? Really?
Yeah. Now, the text does clarify these aren't dense physical forms like ours. They're manifestations of their spiritual essence. It's like their identity, their consciousness can take on a perceivable form that isn't bound by our physical laws. Maybe like a thought made tangible. Their inner state, memories, personality, even how they want to appear, kind of coalesces into a form other spirits can see. And sometimes mediums, too. Pauline, for example, talks about seeing a big picture of myself and thinking how nice her hair looked, even after her transition. And Goldwyn Smith, the historian, he mentions holding a Louis F. Steve cane in his hand, almost like he's testing it out, or maybe just expressing a personal style.
This is probably the biggest concern for so many people when thinking about the afterlife. What happens to our relationships? Do families stay together? Is love really eternal, or do earthly connections just dissolve?
The sources give a really nuanced answer here. It challenges some assumptions but reinforces others, I think. You might expect families to just stick together automatically because, well, they're family. But the text says very clearly, the only bonds that hold people together in the spirit world are the bonds of the soul.
Bonds of the soul, so not just blood ties.
Exactly. It implies relationships there are redefined by deeper spiritual connections, shared affinities, love that resonates at a soul level, rather than just earthly family trees or social obligations. Goldwyn Smith, the historian spirit, he initially found this idea of families not automatically staying together. He called it heathenish. It shocked his earthly ideas. But he apparently came to understand this spiritual basis for connection, accepting it as a higher truth.
But even with that shift from physical ties to soul ties, there's still this deep sense of continuity, of love carrying on, which is incredibly comforting. We hear about Pauline and Emile, Corson's children in spirit, still feeling deep affection for their father dear. They talk about being a happier family in all the spirit spheres. And Caroline Rollin Corson, Hiram's sister, says, "The love that held us together through all the years is now the golden cord which binds us now." So it seems those deep soul-level bonds, they don't just persist, they actually strengthen. They become the main thing holding relationships together.
Absolutely. And the idea of love seems to expand beyond our earthly definitions, too. Caroline even says, your mother is as much my mother as she is yours, and I love her just as fondly as I do my own mother. It shows this incredibly inclusive, expanded sense of family love beyond genetics. We also see this idea of bands or companies of spirits forming, not just based on earthly family, but on shared interests, common goals, spiritual resonance, like that band that formed around Hiram Corson, including the Brownings, Longfellow, Whitman, drawn together by their shared literary and spiritual interests.
Ah, so you find your tribe, basically.
Kind of. It shows social structures adapt, but connection is still vital. It's just built on spiritual resonance and shared purpose, suggesting our deepest connections really are soul to soul. Hashtag ethical and social engagement from the spirit side.
Okay, it's fascinating that spirits stay active, keep their personalities, connect with each other, but do they care about us? About what's happening down here on Earth? Our struggles, our social issues, current events? Are they still engaged with our world, or do they just kind of retreat into their own spiritual existence?
According to these sources, they absolutely care, unequivocally. They maintained a vital interest in the social problems of your Earth world. That's a direct quote. And it's not just passive watching. They actively work for the betterment of the world. They promote mutual cooperation and artistic expression. They aim to bring men to an understanding of truth and justice. Phillips Brooks, for instance, says he often goes into the crowded tenement districts of the city where he lived and carries a radiant influence like a Christ.
Wow, so active spiritual service, even after death.
Exactly. A tangible, compassionate engagement. It's not detached observation from afar.
That implies this ongoing active influence for good, not just watching, but participating somehow. Some spirits explicitly say they want to help people who have migrated from your sphere, meaning newly arrived spirits, or help those still on Earth struggling. They're not content just finding heaven as some place of rest. They know, as the text says, that heaven is a condition, not a place. That completely changes the game, doesn't it? The afterlife isn't a static destination. It's a dynamic state of being, of purpose, of service, continuous evolution and contribution.
Precisely. And this is where you see the really profound implications, especially for anyone in the spiritual community trying to understand their own purpose and impact.
Right.
William Ewart Gladstone, the famous British Prime Minister, he talks about this beautifully. On Earth, his focus was statecraft, politics. But now he realizes the whole spiritual realm seems a great republic, where chance plays no part and fate makes no fools. Classification is by character.
Classification by character, not status or wealth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your place is earned by your spiritual development. He even expresses resentment towards criminal immigration to the spirit world, asking, what can we do with them? It underscores this continued concern for morality, for justice, for the ongoing work of spiritual upliftment, even after they've passed on. They're not just observing, they're actively grappling with the consequences of earthly choices in their new reality. It shows the work of self-improvement, of contributing to good. It just keeps going.
All right, let's dig into a really core question these sources seem to tackle, and they offer a perspective that feels, well, pretty revolutionary compared to some traditional views. How do they define the spirit itself, especially in relation to the physical body? What's its essential nature?
It's a fascinating view. They present the spirit as being more or less conditioned by the physical body, meaning the body acts like a vehicle, and it can either help or hinder the spirit's expression. So a body that gives the spirit exceptional freedom of action might result in what we call genius. The spirit's brilliance can shine through easily. But conversely, an unfit body might lead to what's called an idiot, where the spirit's expression is really limited by its physical instrument.
So it's a spiritual explanation for different human potentials and limitations, not just biology.
Exactly. It suggests the spirit is the primary driver, even if the vehicle, the body, has different specs, different limitations.
Okay, but here's the part that feels really transformative. Despite how the body might condition it, the core nature of the spirit itself is described as essential and unchangeable, always. It's the same in the saint and the sinner, they say, and crucially, one with the universal spirit. So physical limitations, abilities, even our earthly moral judgments, they don't define the spirit's inherent quality. Only how it manages to manifest or express itself while it's here. That suggests this inherent divine spark, right? A fundamental goodness inside everyone, no matter what. That feels incredibly hopeful.
It is. That oneness is a really foundational theme running through all these messages. It's like the spiritual anchor. The source material states flat out that religion and worship would be wholly fictitious, meaning artificial, if the human spirit and the universal spirit were not one and the same and mutually attractive. It argues that the more someone advances in responsiveness to this interconnection, this divine spark within, the more spontaneous they become. They become a law to himself, leading to true freedom and knowledge absolute.
Knowledge absolute.
Yeah, it's presented as this higher kind of knowing, beyond just senses or intellect. It's about directly connecting to spiritual consciousness, to inner wisdom. It implies our whole spiritual journey is really about realizing this inherent oneness we already have and just letting it express itself more fully, becoming more authentically who we truly are at the core.
Now, traditional religion often talks about sin, sometimes even total depravity, concepts that can carry a lot of weight, a lot of guilt and fear for people. How do these messages, coming from this spirit perspective, reinterpret those really ingrained ideas?
This is where things get really radical, honestly, and it has huge implications for how we might view human imperfection, especially within the spiritual community. They say bondage of spirit is the real meaning behind what's falsely called depravity of spirit. The text explicitly rejects the old Calvinistic idea of total depravity. It asserts there can be no such thing as total depravity, the whole universe of mind and matter.
Wow, that's a direct challenge.
It is a direct challenge to a cornerstone of some theologies. It suggests this fundamental belief in the inherent goodness, the purity of the spirit itself.
So it's not inherent corruption. Bondage of spirit, they say, happens when the animal nature is in control, when the senses are unchecked in their rule. That's a powerful difference. It's not that the spirit itself is bad. It stays pure, connected to the universal spirit. Instead, it's like the physical body, the lower desires are hindering the spirit's expression, creating a blockage, a spiritual impediment maybe, rather than intrinsic evil.
Exactly. A temporary blockage, not core corruption. And here's the really startling part. Sin, which theologians often trace back to Adam and Eve, is reinterpreted here as a disease that should be treated by the medical profession rather than cajoled by the pulpit or punished by the barrister.
Treated by doctors, not priests or judges.
That's the implication. It fundamentally shifts moral failings away from spiritual corruption or divine punishment and towards being a condition that affects the body's ability to properly express the pure spirit within. Valentine Mott, the spirit physician, he really emphasizes this from his medical view. He says, no man can perfectly express the highest gifts within him in an imperfect body. And the sooner we medical men recognize this, we shall understand that sin is a disease. It offers this incredibly compassionate new lens, doesn't it, for the spiritual community to view human flaws and suffering, moving away from judgment towards understanding, healing, maybe even therapy. Liberation from sin becomes about restoration, not just forgiveness.
Okay, these messages make a really important distinction, one that I think resonates with a lot of people on their own spiritual path today, the difference between a religious life and a spiritual life. What exactly is that difference according to these spirit communicators, and which one do they say is more important?
They're very clear about it. The text defines religion as a function. That implies, outward practices, rituals, following doctrines, belonging to an organization, things you do or believe in a structured way. But in contrast, spiritual life is described as the attribute of the soul. It's called the greatest of earthly attainments. The person who realizes it is the completest man.
So it's internal versus external.
Precisely. The emphasis is totally on an internal state of being, a quality of your inner self, not just external actions or affiliations. It's about who you are deep down, not just the religious box you tick.
Phillips Brooks, the clergyman spirit, he puts this so well, reinforcing that difference. He says he wouldn't tell people to leave their jobs or daily lives to get their religious life, like go sit in church all day. Instead, he'd want to take the religious life to them wherever their vocations might lead them. Fred. And then he clarifies, it is not the religious life, religion is a function, but the spiritual life. That means real spiritual growth is this inner state, right? Something that lives in all parts of your life, your work, your family, your choices, not just something you do on Sunday morning. Your whole life becomes the spiritual practice.
Exactly. And the sources actually go further. They offer a pretty sharp critique of how organized religion has sometimes functioned historically. They state, creeds and dogmas were imposed on Christianity by the unspiritualized intellect. But, they argue, someone who is spiritually alive is a Christian, independent of creeds, dogmas, and all other religious equipment. They even claim the church acted as a great obstacle to enlightenment for centuries because of intolerance and rigid dogma, persecuting those who sought truth differently.
That's strong criticism.
It is. It really challenges those conventional religious structures.
Yeah.
And you can see how it would appeal to people looking for a direct, personal spiritual connection, one based on inner knowing, not external rules. The text asserts, quite directly, the salvation which Jesus taught comes from within, not from without. And it explicitly rejects vicarious atonement, the idea someone else pays for your sins, calling it an inheritance from the savage past.
Wow. So salvation is self-realization, essentially.
That's the thrust.
Yeah.
It puts the power for salvation squarely back on the individual's own inner spiritual vitality and their journey of realizing it. Hashtag the internal judgment day and spiritual progress.
Okay, this reframing continues even with the big concept of Judgment Day. That phrase brings up images of, a final cosmic trial, maybe fire and brimstone, God with the ledger. How do these sources transform that idea? Is it a literal event or something internal?
Completely internal, according to these messages. They transform it entirely. The Judgment Day for spirits isn't some future event. It's described as the Great Awakening for the spirit. It happens when men are revealed to themselves by the place to which they naturally drift. Remember that classification is by character. This is where it plays out. It's a natural sorting based on your developed spiritual essence, the sum total of your inner quality from your earthly life.
So you're not judged by someone, you just end up where you belong, based on your vibe almost.
Exactly. Less like a trial, more like a natural law of spiritual gravity. You gravitate to your vibrational match, to the company you are inherently aligned with.
So individuals don't stand before a judge. They just find themselves naturally drawn to others of a similar spiritual inclination. Like the example they give, spirits with thieving spirits find themselves with ordinary housebreakers. And in that company, they realize their true inheritance, the direct consequence of their inner state. It's not an external punishment being handed down. It's a self-realized consequence, an unavoidable reflection of who you actually were, shown by the company you keep.
Precisely. A profound self-reflection. Encountering your own true nature through the environment you naturally gravitate towards. And this just highlights how incredibly important it is to cultivate your character, your spiritual nature, while you're here on Earth. Because that is what determines your place, your experience in the afterlife. Gladstone, the statesman, he reflects on this after his transition. He says, it is a most beatific state to be in, to find oneself placed just where one ought to be. Beautiful phrase. And he admits his old earthly theology was wrong when he thought just confessing sins gave you a better standing. He realized it's the true character you built through your choices and spiritual effort that actually matters.
That's a powerful call for personal accountability, isn't it? Your destination is shaped by your journey now.
Absolutely. A continuous process of becoming with real consequences.
We've heard Phillips Brooks mentioned quite a bit, the famous clergyman. Let's zoom in on him for a moment. What were his final thoughts looking back from the spirit world? And what does his continued work there tell us about purpose after death?
Brooks's messages are really quite poignant. True to his nature, he offers this final blessing and benediction to the living. He admits, quite honestly, that when he was on Earth, he didn't really believe in spirit communication. He thought it was maybe interesting for the scientific world, but not really relevant to his religious work.
Oh, interesting. He was a skeptic initially.
Apparently so. But now, from his new perspective, he sees its huge importance in the religious world. He gets the profound spiritual implications for everyone, and he really hammers home that point we discussed. It is not the religious life, religion is a function, but the spiritual life that truly matters. That seems to be a core realization for him after transitioning.
And what's really fascinating is not just his change of mind, but that he's apparently still doing ministry work, actively. He describes helping people who lived lives of deceit and dual expressions, people who weren't authentic. When they arrive in spirit, they find themselves face to face with the real situation, their true character revealed. He says he longs to warn the world, make haste, and decide which shall be your glory, earthly stuff or spiritual richness. And then there's that incredible image of him visiting the crowded tenement districts where he used to live, carrying a radiant influence like a Christ, actively serving from the other side.
It's a powerful image of purpose continuing, isn't it? And he makes this really humble, insightful comment about his own past sermons. He realizes now that many of his words were actually poured through my lips by spirits who were wise and good. He sees God working through others through collaborative spiritual help.
So inspiration is a team effort sometimes.
That's his perspective now. It gives this unique view on divine inspiration, on spiritual assistance being cooperative. He firmly believes death is an open door. And he says the price for connecting across that door isn't money or earthly things, but a subjugation of physical desires and a growing into the fullness and perfectness of the spiritual life. It's all about inner transformation, spiritual evolution. His message is really a call to live that spiritually aligned life now. #tag Longfellow's lessons in spirit communication and creative continuity.
Okay, let's turn to Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, the famous poet whose work so many of us grew up with. He also communicated through these sessions. What did he learn? And what does he say about creativity? Does that continue?
Longfellow apparently saw these sittings as more than just chats. He called them lessons in spirit communication. You can almost hear his scholarly mind still working, trying to understand this new science. He even says he plans to prove their efficacy within his own beloved home circle, wanting to share this connection with his living family. And there's a really touching detail. He reveals that the immense grief he felt after the frightful tragedy in his life, his wife died horribly in a fire, that despair was significantly eased by believing the spirits of the dead were about us.
Wow. So this belief brought him real comfort.
Immense comfort and hope, it seems. It transformed his grief.
And he talks about his home, too, doesn't he? Craigie House. He calls it that old revolutionary domicile, Washington's headquarters. He even invited his Indian friends, his spirit guides, apparently to escort the medium and receiver there. He describes his spirit being at every door and window. It really shows that deep connection to places, doesn't it? That energy lingering. He even mentions his library still feeling at home there.
It's incredibly vivid. And yes, he absolutely stresses that creative life continues.
This is such a comforting thought for artists, writers, anyone creative. Walt Whitman, another poet in the Spirit group, backs this up strongly. Whitman says, I am still writing. As long as there are people in any sphere of existence, there must be poets and lovers of poets. He calls it not a lost art in the spirit land, but a perfected one.
Perfected art.
Yeah, it offers huge inspiration, suggesting our highest callings, our creative sparks, they don't just continue, they actually flourish after physical life, reaching new levels of insight and perfection.
And then we have the Brownings, Robert and Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Their love story is legendary, almost as famous as their poems. What do their messages reveal about that incredible bond? And how does their love translate into their work from the spirit side? Elizabeth speaks for both of them initially. She insists they refuse to be separated from each other or the author, meaning Hiram Corson. She talks about their deep happiness in the communion. And she quotes what seems to be their shared mission statement from Robert's work. Love, let us love so well that our work shall be sweeter for our love.
So their love fuels their spiritual work.
That's exactly the idea. It's their guiding principle. Their unity is profound. She says, wherever one is, there is the other. It's an unbreakable bond that deepens into this shared spiritual purpose after death.
Robert Browning also speaks, right? He acknowledges how his poetry was often difficult for people on Earth. He says understanding it is only possible by those who have felt the touch of the infinite spirit. He links appreciating his work directly to spiritual sensitivity. Like you need soul resonance, not just intellect.
Yes, exactly.
And he wishes he could find a better avenue of expression to the world. He laments that many people might be a bit psychic, but they don't have the response to those touches of soul expression. He's longing for that deeper connection.
He really is. And Elizabeth, describing herself as ever the utilitarian, even in spirit, she expresses this powerful vision. She wants to mend all these broken threads in the garment of life and let God's love shine through the perfect whole. It's a vision of universal healing. She believes that helping someone come out from under the shadow of death, whether that's literal death or just despair and ignorance, makes them a better citizen, a better lover of God, and a more perfect soul.
So spirit communication becomes a form of service.
Universal service, exactly. Contributing to humanity's betterment, bringing the kingdom of God nearer to the gray old world. Their amazing love story becomes this blueprint for a mission of healing and upliftment from the spirit side. Love as a truly transformative power.
Beyond those big literary names, we also hear from others: Goldwin Smith, the historian, Valentine Mott, the physician, and the Corson family members themselves. What unique perspectives do they bring? Any practical wisdom or lessons from their ongoing journeys?
Goldwin Smith is fascinating because, as you mentioned, he was a known skeptic in life, famously bids farewell to ghosts. So his transformation is striking. His very first message from the spirit side. I believe the world would fall to pieces if it were not held together by the influences from the spirit world.
What a turnaround.
Incredible, isn't it? From a sharp, logical, academic mind. It's powerful evidence within this context. Now, he values work, intellectual, spiritual work, as the salvation of the race. He urges people to be studious, interested, and devoted lovers of the fine things of life. And remember that Lou the Kefty cane he holds. It's almost a humorous confirmation that personal quirks, identity, they persist.
And Valentine Mott, the doctor, he brings his medical view into the spirit realm, aiming to oust death and fit men to express all that is in them. It's about enabling spiritual potential, not just fixing bodies. And his redefinition of sin as a disease needing medical treatment that's revolutionary. He even gives practical insights on things like anesthetics and patient confidence, showing his professional interests and intellect are still fully engaged, just applied differently now to spiritual well-being.
Exactly. And finally, the Corson children, Pauline, Emile, and Joseph, who passed at different ages. Their messages really emphasize continued growth and learning in the spirit world. They talk about their closeness as a family, their ongoing education there. Pauline, who died as a delicate little girl, describes herself now as wholesome and tender and brave. She shows this clear spiritual maturing, gaining vitality. And they describe how they travel using magnetic rivers between loved ones.
Magnetic rivers.
Yeah, they explain it as this energetic mechanism. They say the more strongly you love us, the deeper the current and the more swiftly we can come to you. It implies our love isn't just a feeling. It literally creates this energetic pole, this current, that helps spirits connect and travel across distances. Love generates the energy for spiritual connection.
That's amazing. It links emotion directly to spiritual physics almost.
It really does. It gives us tangible understanding of how love powers connection. And it encourages us to nurture those bonds now. They're clearly still learning, teaching each other, showing how vibrant and evolving the spirit realm is for everyone there. Hashtag outro.
Wow. Okay, we have journeyed through some truly fascinating, really personal accounts today, exploring how spirit communication supposedly evolves from just simple raps to full conversations. We looked at who makes it happen, the mediums, the receptive receivers, and how they tried to validate identities, even using clever cross-referencing against the skepticism of the time. And we got this vivid picture of an active, evolving spirit world, full of sensory experiences, ongoing purpose, and these incredibly strong bonds of soul that don't end with death.
Yeah, and we also dug into some really profound reinterpretations of big spiritual ideas. Seeing sin maybe not as corruption, but as a condition to be healed. Understanding spiritual life as this deep inner quality, not just religious practice. And seeing Judgment Day as this internal awakening based on your own character. And maybe most movingly, we heard those personal messages from historical figures, Longfellow finding peace, the Brownings using their love for universal service, Goldwin Smith's complete turnaround from skepticism, all showing continued growth, wisdom, and active involvement in making things better, both there and here.
This deep dive, it really offers more than just, interesting information. It presents this whole new framework, potentially, for understanding the continuity of life, the power of spiritual connection, whether you're just starting to explore these ideas, maybe asking those big life questions, or if you've been on this path for years. These messages really remind us maybe that veil between worlds is thinner, more connected to our everyday lives than we usually think.
Yeah. Absolutely. So as you sit with all this extraordinary glimpse beyond the veil, here's maybe a final thought to consider. What if the most important spiritual work we can do right here in this life isn't just about preparing for some far-off heaven? What if it's about cultivating that spiritual vitality now, that quality that lets us recognize and connect with the universal spirit right here, right now, experiencing that kingdom of God not as a future place, but as an ever-present reality within and around us? And what if by doing that, we don't just transform ourselves and find our own deep purpose, but we actually actively help those who've passed on, and maybe even those yet to come, on their spiritual journeys too? What if our lives here become living bridges between the worlds?